Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm Sam Albanese from the National Weather Service. And to start with today's weather, we do have a rather strong low that's moving in by southwest Alaska, southwest Kodiak Island into southwestern Alaska. It's going to push a front towards the panhandle in the overnight hours and into tomorrow. And because of that, we do have a winter storm warning for heavy snow in the Haines and Skagway area, expecting upwards of 16 inches of snow there by tomorrow afternoon. Also have a blizzard warning in the Thompson Pass area near Valdez, expecting blizzard conditions to develop tonight around 9 or 10 p.m., continuing into the morning hours. And along with that, probably going to see about 2 feet of snow in the pass by tomorrow evening. Also, we have blizzard warnings in effect for the Bristol Bay area, basically the northern portion of that region towards the Dillingham-Togiak area, expecting snow and blowing snow there. It's already started, and that's going to continue into the early morning hours before that lets up or changes over and mixes with rain. Now we'll take a look at the satellite imagery over the state of Alaska, and we can see what's going on. Here's our low pressure system moving up basically towards southwest Kodiak Island. It's going to take a track that takes it up towards Iliamna. And here's the frontal boundary, and we'll take a look at that one more time. And you can see the low pressure system here with the front wrapping around. That's going to push the moisture on off towards southeast Alaska as it moves across the Gulf of Alaska. Eventually, a weak component of this low will be in the northern Gulf of Alaska, as we'll see when we get to the surface maps. Now, behind this low pressure system, we do have another area of low pressure in the Bering Sea, but nothing really significant going on there. Some showery type conditions with that. Today's weather, the weather map, here's that low pressure system I was talking about, the frontal boundary just to the south end of Bristol Bay through Kodiak Island. And I drew this earlier today. The front's actually pushed a little bit further north, and King Salmon and Iliamna have already seen their temperatures go up into the mid to upper 30s with rainfall as opposed to snow. Blowing snow in that, not Dillingham per se, but Togiak and in that region of the northern portions of Bristol Bay. They're seeing some blizzard-like conditions there. Precipitation will be spreading on up into the Cook Inlet region. It has been through the afternoon, and then this front's going to work its way to the east with rain over the Kodiak Island area and rain in advance of the front. Southeast Alaska had some light rain occurring today in the southern two-thirds of the Panhandle with a mixture of rain and snow up towards the north, but nothing too significant. That's not the system. That's not the weather that we're concerned about. The weather we're concerned about with that winter storm warning is going to be associated with this frontal boundary. Taking a look out in the Bering Sea, weak low pressure over the central Bering Sea down towards the central Aleutians. Some showery type activity around these low pressure systems. Actually a lot of warm air associated with this. Rain type showers along the Aleutian Islands and very warm conditions, or typically warm conditions for this time of year. Taking a look at the forecast map for tonight. The low pressure system is moving up towards Iliamna. Front is going to just off of Prince William Sound and along the outer coast of southeast Alaska. The moisture is going to push up in advance of this front into southeast Alaska. Rain in the southern half of the Panhandle as well as that outer coastal area. Snow inland and heavier snow as you move on up towards the Haines and Skagway area. Rain and snow mixed, starting off as snow in Yakutat, mixing or changing over to rain. Rain in Prince William Sound itself until you get into the northern portion of the sound up towards Valdez. That's going to be snow there, and heavy snow at times, especially in Thompson Pass tonight and tomorrow, with blizzard conditions as well with the winds that we're expecting there. Cloudy conditions over the southern half of the mainland part of the state. Clear conditions up in the northern part of the state, but with the windy conditions, especially at ridgetop across the eastern interior and the eastern Brooks Range, blowing snow can be expected there. Blowing snow also along the Arctic coast in somewhat windy conditions in that 30 to 40 mile an hour range up there. Behind this low pressure system, expect some snow or blowing snow. Well, the blowing snow down in the Bristol Bay area, some snow along the outer coast of the Kuskokwim Delta, chance of snow further north, some snow likely up towards the St. Lawrence Island area. And in the north central part of the Bering Sea around this low pressure system, a mixture of rain and snow showers. Our next system that's going to come into play is this one coming up into the central and western Aleutian Islands. Windy, wet conditions can be anticipated with that. Taking a look at the forecast for Wednesday, the low pressure system doesn't really move much further during the day Wednesday from overnight hours. It's going to basically sit in that Iliamna King Salmon area. The front dissipates to a trough and also merges with the Arctic frontal boundary, and therefore southeast Alaska, weak low pressure lee side trough of the mountains. It's going to form there. Expect snow heavy at times to continue throughout the day tomorrow in the northern part of the Panhandle. Rain to the south. Snow in the northern portions of Prince William Sound with rain in the southern portions. Some scattered snow showers over the south central region of the state. Rain showers down towards Kodiak Island. A mixture of rain and snow showers, predominantly rain showers across the Alaska Peninsula, with some snow showers as you go on up along the Bering Sea coast towards the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta. Over into the central Bering Sea with this system coming in over the central Aleutian Islands. Expect a mixture, rain in the Aleutian Islands right on up even as far north as the Pribilof Islands, although they're just going to be cloudy there. The rain-snow boundary is way on up into the northern Bering Sea along that Arctic frontal boundary. Behind the low, we will see some cold air coming back down across the western Aleutian Islands, and you'll have a mixture of rain and snow showers there. Taking a look at the forecast now for Thursday. Weak low pressure is persisting in that North Gulf Coast. Going to continue to see some snow in the northern half of the Panhandle, or a mixture of rain and snow as you go a little bit further south, but not nearly as heavy. It's kind of in the tapering off phase there. Some rain and snow showers are possible towards Prince William Sound. Cloudy conditions over the south central region of the state. With our system moving on up into the eastern Bering Sea, this thing is going to be producing some stronger winds along the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coast, as well as towards the Bristol Bay area. But in Bristol Bay, a mixture of rain and snow, warm conditions, so the wind and rain and snow shouldn't be too bad, nothing like what they should be experiencing tonight. Some snow can be expected along the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coast, possibly blowing snow with the wind that should be associated with this low pressure system. Rain and snow towards the Pribilof Islands, cloudier conditions over the central Aleutian Islands, and out into the western Aleutian Islands. Start to see yet the effects of another system that'll be coming up later in the week, spreading some rain and snow, rapidly changing over to rain in the western Aleutians. Over the interior portion of the state, a big push of clouds is going to push right on up to the Brooks Range, even across the Brooks Range to a degree. Still expect some clear conditions along the Arctic coast, possibly even seeing a continuation of the blowing snow, but that far out, probably without any fresh snow to be introduced into the environment. Shouldn't see too much of a problem there with that. Now taking a look at temperatures around the state this afternoon. Southeast Alaska, the Sitka area, and then southern Panhandle, low to mid 40s, and as you move on inland, mid 30s towards Juneau, mid 20s up into the Haines and Skagway area, mid 30s along the North Gulf Coast at Yakutat. Temperatures in the 30s to low 40s over the Prince William Sound area, southern Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island. Cooler as you move further north in the Cook Inlet region into the mid 20s. Copper River Basin temperatures in the eastern, western part of the basin in the teens to the east, still staying below zero. Eastern interior temperatures generally below zero, though there were some warmer locations. Pretty much where the wind was blowing, it warmed up as the atmosphere was able to mix a bit more. Taking a look at the northern portions of the state, along the Arctic coast, temperatures generally right around 5 above to 5 below, except as you get over towards the northwest Arctic coast. Still one location that was somewhat wind sheltered, down around 20 below. Towards the Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound temperatures generally in the single digits to teens, even 20 at Nome. In the eastern interior, temperatures generally a little bit warmer than what we had been seeing, actually quite a bit warmer, only 10 below at Galena. Generally, most of the temperatures were above zero throughout much of that western interior. towards the Kuskokwim Valley. Still had some areas below in the minus teens. Sparrowvon was 28 above, and the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coast was in the teens to mid-20s. Southwestern Alaska and the Aleutian Islands, temperatures in the Bristol Bay area in the mid-30s to upper 30s in the southern part of the and eastern part of the Bristol Bay zone, low 30s as you move further to the west. Mid-30s across the Alaska Peninsula, the Aleutian Islands, upper 30s in the Pribilof Islands, and mid-30s out into the western Aleutian Islands way out at Shemya. Taking a look now at the expected low temperatures tonight. Southeast Alaska, not a big change from your current temperatures, generally in the mid-30s to low mid-40s in the southern Panhandle, teens and 20s as you move further north. 20s and 30s along the North Gulf Coast to mid-30s across Kodiak Island, 20s in the Cook Inlet region, teens as you move further inland. In the Copper River Basin, temperatures are going to be generally in the negative readings, although you may see some locations staying above zero. Eastern interior, actually this Fort Yukon temperature, they were only at 33 below now, so expect it to be staying right around that 30 to 35 below range instead of the 28 below that I erroneously put there. Along the North Arctic coast, temperatures generally in the minus teens. Seward Peninsula, single digits above, down towards the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, where you can see single-digit temperatures, and the Alaska Peninsula in the mid-30s. Same thing with the Pribilof Islands and the Aleutian Islands. For our highs tomorrow, temperatures in southeast Alaska generally going to stay in the 40s in the southern Panhandle to the low 30s up to the north. Along the North Gulf Coast and South Central, expect temperatures in the 30s to low 40s, teens and 20s as you move further north. Cooler as we move further north into the interior, into the single digits below zero along the Arctic coast. Southwestern Alaska in the teens to low 20s, upper 30s across the Alaska Peninsula to low 40s on Alaska, mid 30s in the Pribilof Islands with upper 30s to low 40s along the Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at our flying weather, marginal to IFR conditions in southeast Alaska, marginal to IFR conditions along the North Gulf Coast, across southwestern Alaska and up towards the St. Lawrence Island area. Marginal conditions throughout the majority of the Bering Sea, some IFR conditions in the central Aleutians, and some marginal conditions up into the western interior, as well as the Copper River Basin and parts of the upper Yukon Valley. Taking a look at our passes, VFR conditions for Anaktuvik as well as Adigan Pass. IFR conditions as you move on down to the Alaska Range at Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. Marginal conditions becoming IFR at Rainy. Marginal conditions can be expected in Windy Pass. VFR conditions in Isabel as well, not Mantasta Pass. They'll see some marginal conditions. Marginal conditions in Tahneta Pass, and expect IFR conditions in Portage Pass as well as Chilkoot and White Pass. Freezing levels tomorrow at the surface over the majority of the state, sloping to about 4,000 feet in the southern Panhandle and around 2,000 feet across the Aleutian Islands for tomorrow. Icing for tomorrow, so occasional moderate mixed icing from the northern Panhandle across the North Gulf Coast and across south central Alaska and Kodiak Island from your freezing level to 13,000 feet. Occasional moderate rime icing over the Aleutian Islands from the freezing level to 17,000 feet. Our jet stream tomorrow starts off at about 155 knot jet coming off the North Pacific to 135 knot jet well south of the state and the Gulf of Alaska. A weaker jet coming across the Alaska Peninsula and southwest Alaska at 70 knots, and then coming and moving inland at 85 to 100 knots over the Queen Charlotte Island region. Down to the 9,000 foot level, generally light winds over the majority of the interior, 30 knots up on the Arctic coast, 30 to 40 knots in the Gulf of Alaska to 25 to 35 knots over southeast Alaska, and around our low pressure system in the Aleutians, 50 to 60 knot winds associated with that. Down to the 3,000 foot level, again, generally light winds over the western interior, 30 knot winds over the Arctic coast, lighter winds over southeast Alaska, stronger winds over the Alaska Peninsula around 15 to 25 knots, about 60 knot winds associated with that low out over the central Aleutian Islands. And for our turbulence, the main area of turbulence is going to be moderate turbulence below 3,000 feet along the Aleutian Islands, the Alaska Peninsula to Kodiak Island, as well as the Kenai Peninsula and the Chugach Mountains. And that wraps up this portion of the show. Enjoy the segment and come back for the marine forecast.
Winter, cold, wet, and deadly. Every year, snowstorms strand hundreds of people in their cars, isolate thousands in their homes, and kill those who are unprepared. In this film, you will see and hear true stories about 6 people caught in severe winter weather and isolated from help. Ed and Paul Maluski were going to their cabin to button it up for the winter when it began to snow.
The storm hit about halfway up the mountain. By the time we got about a mile from our cabin, we kept getting stuck every 10 feet.
We were always out digging, which got us wet. Then the snow got real heavy, and you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. It was pretty clear the Bronco wasn't going to make it, so we figured we'd walk to a neighbor's cabin. It wasn't real far, and we know that area like the back of our hands.
The funny thing is, everything changes at night. And with the blizzard, well, you couldn't tell which way you were going. I thought I knew, but boy, I just couldn't tell for sure.
Dad! Leave this back here! We don't need it! There's food in the cabin!
You know, it was funny. I'd be thinking real clear for a while, and then just didn't know what I was doing or where I was going. I couldn't even remember Paul's name, my own boy, and I couldn't remember his name.
I got worried wading through that snow. Dad was really beat. He could barely keep up. I started thinking about things I'd never thought about before. I fell and dropped our flashlight and didn't pick it up right away like you normally would. I knew we were getting delirious then. Then we hit that gate. Well, it's nowhere near the cabin.
We've gone too far! Let's go back to the Bronco!
Paul, we can't go back. We wouldn't make it. I wouldn't make it. We've got to find that cabin or we can't make it. Now, come on, we've got to find that cabin.
From then on, I just kept thinking, you gotta keep going. You gotta keep pushing.
I saw that cabin and said one long prayer. I could hardly believe we finally found it. We walked for 2.5 hours and it was less than a half mile from the Bronco. All I could think was, we had to get inside. We finally got in. And then we didn't say anything at all. We didn't talk.
Ed and Paul had become victims of hypothermia, a physical condition caused by a person's body losing more heat than it produces. The result? A dangerously low body temperature. When Ed and Paul were outside, the conditions were perfect for hypothermia to set in. It was cold, and they were tired and wet. First, their bodies tried to generate more heat to combat the cold. They began to shiver. It was a losing battle. The constant exposure to cold, wet weather defeated this first line of their body's defense. Then, in order to keep the remaining heat concentrated in the body core, the brain, heart, and lungs, their bodies began to cut down blood circulation to their arms and legs. This gave their vital organs a fighting chance to continue functioning. But it also caused the loss of muscle control in their hands, legs, and arms. As their natural defenses gradually began to break down, they became more confused and disoriented. If they had not found the cabin, the cold would have defeated all their body's defenses, and they would have died. In this kind of emergency, the first thing to do is get out of the cold. Then, carefully begin rewarming the body. The most important areas to rewarm first are those areas nearest the body core, the sides of the chest, the neck, the groin, and the head. These are the areas of highest heat loss and highest heat absorption. Warming these areas first lets the body build back and hold its heat, starting with the body core and gradually spreading to the rest of the body. Ed and Paul did not rewarm themselves correctly. They began by warming their hands and feet, and that could have killed them. Warming the body's extremities first forces cold blood to flow back to the body core. The result is usually death. Paul went to bed that night shivering uncontrollably because his body had not been rewarmed properly. Both men needed medical assistance desperately. It's a miracle they survived. Part of the miracle was the cabin they broke into. It was owned by a man who believed in being prepared for anything.
Once we got warmed up, we found plenty of wood for the fire. Besides, there was a propane tank to heat the cabin too.
There was plenty of food, enough to last us a couple of weeks. And you could eat it right out of the can. You didn't need a stove to cook it on.
Nothing. Well, they know we're gone. Yeah, they should.
Candles, flashlights, lanterns. All were on hand with plenty of batteries and fuel to keep them working. Ed and Paul even found a battery-powered radio. It was a relief to hear that rescuers were out looking for them. The cabin had a well-stocked first aid kit, too. Ed and Paul were stranded way up in the mountains, far from any help. But even in a city, snowstorms can be dangerous, especially for the elderly. The elderly can fall victim to hypothermia even at home. It's essential for them to maintain warm room temperatures of 68 degrees Fahrenheit or more. Continued exposure to low room temperatures can easily cause older people to become hypothermic, and it is very difficult to detect.
Your turn now.
They usually don't shiver as hypothermia takes hold, but their breathing may become shallow and their heartbeat may slow down. Either of these symptoms during cold weather means medical help is needed immediately. The best cure, of course, for anyone is prevention. Stay warm all the time, eat well and regularly, and keep physically fit. These factors will help protect you from winter cold.
Did you get back to the clinic this morning? Good.
Welcome back, and we'll start by talking about the marine forecast, southeast Alaska. Southern inside waters, it's expecting some gales initially in the southern inside waters down towards Ketchikan area, and 20 to 25 knot winds as you move on up into the central to northern panhandle region. Off the coast, the outer waters, southwest winds 20 knots, increasing to 25 knots as you move further north, and then 35 knots along that east Gulf Coast. Taking a look at that area for Thursday, winds drop off substantially in the inside waters down to 15 knots and 10 knots as you get up towards the Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area. Southwest 20 knots persist along the outer coastal waters, and the winds along the east Gulf Coast are dropping off to west 20 knots. For the south central region, expect gale force winds along the north Gulf Coast right on down towards the Barren Islands with 45 knot southwesterlies south of Kodiak Island. Up Chillicothe Strait, southwest winds 25 knots, east to northeast winds 30 knots towards the Augustine area. Northeast winds 30 knots coming down Cook Inlet with southeast winds 25 knots in Prince William Sound. By Thursday, expect the winds in the Sound to drop off substantially down to about 10 knots. 15 knot winds along the north Gulf Coast to 25 knot winds south of the Kenai Peninsula, 25 knot winds south of Kodiak Island, 25 knot winds persisting in the Chillicothe Strait area, southwest winds 25 knots up towards Augustine with 15 knot winds in the Cook Inlet area. For the Alaska Peninsula waters for tomorrow, expect southwest winds 40 knots south of the eastern peninsula and 35 knots south of the western peninsula with 35 knot westerlies on the north side of the peninsula and 30 knot westerlies in that Bristol Bay area. Taking a look at the area for Thursday, winds are going to drop off to 25 knots in Bristol Bay. 35 knot winds are going to persist on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula. Southwest winds 30 knots south of the western peninsula with 25 knot winds south of the eastern Alaska Peninsula. For the Aleutian Islands on Wednesday, expect winds out of the west and southwest, south to southwest to west over the eastern Aleutian Islands at 35 knots, south-southwest winds over the central Aleutian Islands at 35 knots, Winds northwesterly 45 knots over the central to western Aleutian Islands, with northwest to north winds 20 knots over the extreme western Aleutian Islands. By Thursday, winds are going to eventually come around to the south 30 knots over the western Aleutian Islands, southwest winds 35 knots over the central Aleutian Islands, with southwest winds 35 to 45 knots as you move further to the east along the central Aleutian Islands. And then over the eastern Aleutian Islands, southwest winds 35 to 40 knots can be expected on both the north and south side of the chain. For our Bering Sea coastal waters, expect west winds 20 knots in the Pribilof Islands to 30 knots south of the Nunivak Island region. Variable winds 15 knots on the north side of Nunivak Island to northeast winds 15 knots over St. Matthew Island, with 20-knot northerly winds over the St. Lawrence Island area. Taking a look at the area for Thursday, expect your winds to be southwest 25 to 30 knots along the Nunivak Island region, southwest 30 knots in the Pribilof Islands, winds out of the north to northeast 15 to 25 knots as we come from the St. Lawrence Island down to the St. Matthew Island waters. For the Arctic coastal waters, expect your winds to be out of the east to northeast over the entire region. Gale force 35 knots over the eastern Arctic coastal waters to 30 knots over the northwestern Arctic coastal waters, and eventually down to 20 knots as we come outside of Kotzebue Sound. Taking a look at the area for Thursday, winds, the directions don't change, but the winds are going to start to let up 25 knots across the entire Arctic coastal region until you get down towards Kotzebue Sound, where you can expect your winds to drop off to 15 to 20 knots. For a very quick recap, remember, heavy snow warning for the northern panhandle in the Haines-Skagway area, expecting upwards of about 16 inches potentially in that area through tomorrow afternoon. Thompson Pass, blizzard warnings starting tonight through tomorrow morning, and possibly as much as 2 feet of snow can be expected through tomorrow evening there. Blizzard warnings over the Bristol Bay region tonight as well. We're at a time for the show this evening. Just want to say Happy New Year to Randy and Happy New Year to everybody else.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.